country that they themselves They worked to build the country that they themselves envisioned. They taught each other to read, fed each other, provided health care for one another, and educated one another's children. Excuse me. I think I missed that. Need to go back to the slides. There we go. But the outside world didn't like what the Nicaraguan people said, and the US tried to silence their voices by funding the Contra guerrillas to murder literacy volunteers, nurses, teachers, and children. The Nicaraguan people spoke. They held their first democratic elections in 1984 and voted for the Sandinista Party to continue building their new country and looking after one another as brothers and sisters. But the outside world didn't like what the Nicaraguan people said, and the US sanctioned the country with the crippling economic embargo. The Nicaraguan people spoke. They asked for international solidarity, for people to come and see the war with their own eyes and take their witness back to the US to stop the war. We listened. Many of us came down from North Carolina and went to the war zones and saw the landmines stamped with "Made in the USA" and spoke with the Nicaraguan civilians maimed by those mines. We brought our witness back to the US and worked to stop the war. By the 1990 elections, the Contra War had killed 50,000 Nicaraguans. The US message to Nicaragua was clear: vote for our candidate and the war will end. Vote for the Sandinista Party and the war will continue. Can I just check that we're on the right slide? There's a coffin, there's a set of coffins there. Can you all see that? No.
No, we're
Okay.
seeing CSE.
Okay, then I've got, something has gone wrong. So I'm stopping share and starting again. Sorry about that. I hit a button that didn't work. Let's see.
We still have CSE.
Okay. Is that still CSE?
Yes.
Yeah.
Goodness, okay. Sorry for this. This is a different computer, and so it does things differently. Okay. Are we back on the first?
Yes, back on the
Page.
first slide. Yes.
Okay. Okay, so there we go. We're going through. Are we moving through slides now?
No, just
Nope.
still have the first slide. No, we don't have anything, Becca.
All right.
Okay, first slide.
You may want to actually start up the full PowerPoint slideshow rather than be in the edit mode, and then share that.
Okay.
All your slides are over to the side of the screen.
Yeah. Are they still to the side of the screen?
Yeah. You might be able to use that and just click on them.
I did this the last time I did this, it worked out somehow. And now I'm trying to figure out how it worked. So, okay, let me see if I can. I can't seem to be in it and share that at the same time. Let's see. Okay. Gosh, I am so sorry.
I would try broadcast slideshow, which you were just, yeah.
There it
Broadcast
is.
slideshow.
True.
I could sing a little bit while we're waiting if that you'd like that, but I'm not a very good singer.
That would be great. Yes, go ahead, sing songs. Yeah, I don't think I have permission to broadcast. I don't know what that is.
No.
You have clicked in from beginning,
was-
just where you were scrolling over.
I have it on my screen now, but you guys don't,
And,
I believe.
okay, so try to share a different screen. It might be stuck in another screen in your computer. So if you go to share, and then you will try to find a window where the entire where you only see this
Okay,
this
let me
first
see
slide.
if I can. Aha, I think you got it. Is that it?
We have
Yeah,
the first slide.
And are we moving?
it should
How do I-
move.
If you use your down arrow button, it might work.
No.
Take it to advanced
Oh,
yeah.
settings.
Oh,
Yes,
yes.
it's moving by itself.
Okay, hey guys, all right, let's do this. Let's start from the top, shall we? Okay, the Nicaraguan people are speaking. Will we listen? In November, the Nicaraguan people went to the polls and re-elected the Sandinista government. The Nicaraguan people have spoken. Will the world listen? Will foreigners who claim to be in solidarity with Nicaraguans listen? Will we who live in Nicaragua and claim to work to improve the lives of its poor listen? Yes, we will listen as we always have, because when the Nicaraguan people speak, we listen. We are the Center for Development in Central America, a project of the Jubilee House Community, a US 501c3 nonprofit formed in 1979 in North Carolina to serve the poor. After overthrowing a dictatorship that same year, the Nicaraguan people were able to speak for the first time after 5 centuries of Spanish colonization, US imperialism, and a brutal US-backed dictatorship. The Nicaraguan people spoke, and they worked to build the country that they themselves envisioned. They taught each other to read, fed each other, provided healthcare for one another, educated one another's children. But the outside world didn't like what the Nicaraguan people said, and the US tried to silence their voices by funding the Contra guerrillas to murder literacy volunteers, nurses, teachers, and children. The Nicaraguan people spoke. They held their first democratic elections in 1984 and voted for the Sandinista party to continue building their new country and looking after one another as brothers and sisters. But the outside world didn't like what the Nicaraguan people said, and the US sanctioned the country with a crippling economic embargo. The Nicaraguan people spoke. They asked for international solidarity, for people to come and see the war with their own eyes and take their witness back to the US to stop the war. We listened. Many of us came down from North Carolina and went to the war zones and saw the landmines stamped "Made in the USA" and spoke with Nicaraguan civilians maimed by those mines. We brought our witness back to the US and worked to stop the war. By the 1990 elections, the Contra War had killed 50,000 Nicaraguans. The US message to Nicaragua was clear: vote for our candidate and the war will end. Vote for the Sandinista party and the war will continue. The Nicaraguan people spoke. They voted for peace. The Sandinistas peacefully handed power over to neoliberal parties that governed for 16 years. The new US-backed government took away the daily glass of milk for school children and charged money for public education and public health. The Nicaraguan people got poorer and poorer while the rich got richer. The Nicaraguan people spoke. Father Miguel Descoto asked us to come live in Nicaragua and work alongside the Nicaraguan people in Ciudad Sandino, a city of 180,000 located outside Managua. We listened. We started the CDCA project, and in 1994, we moved to Nicaragua. The Nicaraguan people spoke. Small farmers asked us to help them certify their crops as organic so their families could earn more while caring for Mother Earth. We listened. We began our sustainable agriculture projects working with 16 farmers. We now work with 13 cooperatives representing 3,000 small farmers growing organic sesame, peanuts, and coffee. We connect cooperatives to buyers in the US, Europe, and Canada, who remain committed to working directly with the people of Nicaragua, cutting out the middlemen who earn profits off the backs of the poor. We worked with farmers to set up Cooperatives, their co-op that collects, processes, and exports crops, selling to foreign buyers and returning profits to farmers. The Nicaraguan people spoke. The families of the remote El Porvenir Coffee Cooperative asked us to sell their coffee and support their community. The organic coffee cooperative struggles year after year to feed their families and protect their land with its original forest. We listened. For more than 20 years, we've helped them sell their annual crop to buyers in the US. We continue to provide medical care for their 56 families. Now, the CDCA is selling their coffee through our project of subscription-based sales in the US called Farmer Shares. We struggle together with the farmer co-ops to find financing for planting, harvesting, processing, and exporting. Currently, with the worldwide shipping issues, we're also struggling to find empty containers to ship their organic product. The Nicaraguan people spoke. They asked for jobs with dignity. We listened. We started our sustainable economic development projects to give loans to small businesses. We worked to create more sustainable jobs through cooperatives owned by Nicaraguan workers. We created the Vida Fund, a shared risk investment fund that connects people with resources to invest $5,000 or more with Nicaraguan co-ops that need financing. We work with Cooperax to run an organic sesame processing plant, helping farmers add value to their crops and guaranteeing quality for buyers. The processing plant is managed by co-op members and gives work to 42 people. We work with the co-op to decrease their footprint and improve efficiency. They recently installed equipment that will allow them to process a batch of sesame using 80 gallons of water instead of the 2,000 gallons currently being used. The Nicaraguan people speak about climate change because their country is one of the most affected in the world. In an agricultural country that grows 90% of its own food, but largely depends on rainfall, not irrigation, Nicaraguan farmers watch the skies anxiously. This year, our farmers' harvests were affected by lack of rain. The Nicaraguan people speak about climate justice. They've demanded that rich countries with high emissions pay reparations to poor countries like Nicaragua with low emissions, but who are disproportionately affected by climate change. These effects include 2 Category 4 and 5 hurricanes that hit Nicaragua within 2 weeks in 2020. Although the hurricanes devastated the North Caribbean coast of Nicaragua, there were only 27 deaths nationwide because the government evacuated 100,000 vulnerable people before both hurricanes hit and provided temporary shelter. 3 million people were affected. Homes, schools, and hospitals were destroyed. The Nicaraguan people spoke. They asked for help. The Nicaraguan government responded. Last week, my family and I drove across the country to Bilwi, where the hurricanes reached landfall. We saw that nearly a year later, access to electricity and potable water has been restored. Damaged schools and health centers have been repaired or rebuilt. Affected homes have been rebuilt. We walked out on the Bilwi Pier, vital for commerce, which has now been rebuilt. The small regional hospital that was destroyed is being completely rebuilt. When it's finished, it will provide specialized services such as chemotherapy and kidney dialysis, which up until now have only been available 15 hours away in Managua. And improvements continue. In the 1980s, it took 7 days to get to Bilwi. 15 years ago, there was still only 1 kilometer of paved roads in northeastern Nicaragua. When the final stretch is finished this year, there will be 500 kilometers of paved roads connecting the self-governing indigenous and Afro-descendant communities in the North Autonomous Region with Western Nicaragua for the first time. We at the CDCA also listened and responded to the hurricanes. We sent truckloads of used clothing, hygiene kits, blankets, and food, and coordinated with the Rotary Club of Ciudad Sandino to provide seed for immediate replanting in the worst hit areas, using residual ground moisture to quickly eke out another food crop of beans, cassava, plantains, tomatoes, and peppers. Following an earlier Category 5 storm back in 1998, Hurricane Mitch, we got 12,000 new neighbors who had lost their homes and were moved to Ciudad Sandino to create the new barrio of Nueva Vida. Their families were dumped in a cow pasture and given a piece of black plastic. That was the extent of the government aid from the neoliberal government. The Nicaraguan people spoke. In Nueva Vida, they told us they needed water, latrines, houses, jobs. We listened. We worked with the leaders they had democratically elected on each block to resolve every one of these issues together. The Nicaraguan people spoke. They told us they were sick and needed care. We listened. We gave them medicine. We brought doctors to see patients. And in 1999, we opened the Nueva Vida Health Clinic. For the past 22 years, the Nicaraguan people have spoken about their healthcare needs, and we have listened. First, they told us they needed basic care, so we hired doctors and became primary caregivers for the community. In 2007, the Nicaraguan people spoke. They voted the Sandinista Party back into government. Since then, a myriad of social programs have drastically improved the lives of the poor. Education is free again, and so is healthcare. As public health services have improved over the past 15 years, the Nicaraguan people in Nueva Vida have spoken again and again, telling us what they need and how we can best meet those needs. We have listened and responded as their needs have changed. Our clinic services now include general medicine, pediatrics, dentistry, medicines from our people's pharmacy, laboratory tests, ultrasounds and EKGs, psychology, family planning, including implants and Pap screening for cervical cancer, vision checks and glasses, special programs for pregnant women, moms and babies, moms and toddlers, and parents of children with asthma. We have a program for elderly patients, patients with chronic illnesses like hypertension, diabetes, Parkinson's, and epilepsy. We provide integral care for all of our patients. Our programs for at-risk boys and girls have grown to 80 teens 4 days a week, learning about sexual health and taking vocational classes, which this year have included computers, cell phone repair, hairstyling, jewelry and piñata making, and carpentry. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the Nicaraguan people have spoken. They told us they needed to continue to receive integral care at the Nueva Vida Clinic. We have listened. Our services during the pandemic have continued with extra hygiene measures. When the pandemic began, the Nicaraguan people spoke. They said that if Nicaragua shut down the economy and paused its social programs, they would suffer. The Nicaraguan government listened. Even before the first case of COVID in Nicaragua, health workers did 5 million home visits in a country with 1.3 million homes. They prepared 19 hospitals to receive patients, trained healthcare workers, and staffed a national hotline with doctors. Because most Nicaraguans need to work daily in order to feed their families, there were no enforced lockdowns. Schools and businesses have stayed open. The results are that Nicaragua was the only Central American country to increase exports in 2020, and in 2021, Nicaragua reached nearly 9% GDP growth. The Nicaraguan people adjusted to the pandemic quickly, with bus and taxi co-ops, schools, and businesses making creative hand washing stations using masks and social distancing. Throughout the pandemic, the Ministry of Health has followed the latest scientific practices and protocols. They're now routinely giving cheap and effective medicines to patients presenting even one symptom and any of their contacts. These practices have kept Nicaraguans out of the hospital even during our second wave in September and have kept deaths to a minimum. Due to wealthy countries hoarding COVID vaccines, the rollout, which prioritized vaccinating elderly and vulnerable patients first, was initially slower than hoped for in Nicaragua. But beginning in September, donated AstraZeneca vaccines arrived, as well as large quantities of Russian and Cuban vaccines, and massive vaccinations began. My kids, these 2 girls here, got the Abdala Cuban vaccine. In November, door-to-door vaccination began and continues throughout the country. This week, Nicaragua announced that 77% of the population over the age of 2 has been fully vaccinated against COVID-19, and much of the over 30 population has received a booster shot. My husband and I received our Sputnik Light booster shot at our neighbor's house. Moving forward, Nicaragua expects to be producing a Russian vaccine in country by early this year, which it will use locally and export within Latin America. In November, once again, the Nicaraguan people spoke. In the middle of a pandemic with in-person only voting, 65.26% of all Nicaraguans over the age of 16 went to the polls, and 75.87% of them voted for the ruling Sandinista party. I listened and heard loud and clear what the Nicaraguan people had to say. and I saw the electoral process with my own eyes as an accredited election accompanier. But once again, those outside the country don't like what the Nicaraguan people are saying. The US President and State Department are unwilling to listen. They call the elections a sham months before the elections even happened. US elected representatives are unwilling to listen. Congress passed punitive sanctions of the Renacer Act days before the elections, and President Biden signed it into law before official election results were announced. Although the US is not listening, the Nicaraguan people continue speaking. What are they saying? Once again, they're saying, we are voting for peace. Outside polling stations all over the country on election day, that was the most common phrase. Following the US-led violent coup attempt in 2018, which came after the US government sent millions of dollars to fund supposed pro-democracy, human rights, and independent media NGOs in Nicaragua over a period of years, Nicaraguans are clearer than ever that they want peace. The Nicaraguan people continue speaking. What are they saying? Once again, they're saying, we want to continue to build the country that we envision for ourselves. Nicaraguans want to continue their social projects, which in just 14 years have dropped extreme poverty, that's people living on less than $1.90 a day, by more than 10%. And poverty overall has dropped by 23.4%. Improvements in healthcare, combined with the school lunch program, which guarantees a hot meal of beans and rice to 1.2 million primary school children daily, has resulted in a 45% reduction in chronic malnutrition in children under 5 years old, and a 66% reduction in chronic malnutrition in children 6 to 12 years old. A 212% increase in maternal wait homes has led to an 88% decrease in home births, followed by maternal mortality rates lowered by 70% and infant mortality rates lowered by 61%. In education, youth with no schooling at all has dropped from 24% to 4%. Rates for passing primary and secondary grades have increased from 79 to 91%. And remarkably, Nicaraguans with a university degree has risen from 9% to 19%. Electrical coverage has gone from 54% to 99%. In 2007, Nicaragua's electricity was sourced at only 26% renewable. Today, with a huge investment in wind, biomass, geothermal, solar, and hydroelectric, more than 80% of Nicaragua's electricity is produced using renewable resources. Since 2007, 38 million barrels of oil have been saved thanks to this switch. In all aspects of gender equality, Nicaragua is exemplary. According to the Global Gender Gap Report, in overall gender equality, Nicaragua has gone from 62 out of 153 countries to number 5 worldwide, reducing the gender gap by over 80% in just 14 years. In women's health and survival, Nicaragua is number 1 in the world. In women's educational attainment, Nicaragua is number 1 in the world. In women's cabinet ministers, Nicaragua is number 1 in the world. 59% of all cabinet members are women. The Nicaraguan people are speaking. What are they saying? Once again, they're asking for international solidarity, for people to come and see with their own eyes and take their witness back to the US to change policy. We at the CDCA and JHC will listen. We will continue to work in education, not just in farming, business, and public health education, as we've been doing for nearly 30 years, but also teaching those who are outside of Nicaragua about the realities here through social media and our blog, through virtual presentations like this one, and also in person. We will host individuals and groups at Casa Ben Linder, our Solidarity Center and Guest House in Managua, with lots of outdoor space for social distancing, comfortable rooms, and beautiful murals. The Nicaraguan people are speaking. They're asking for your help. What can you do? Come visit Nicaragua and listen to what the people have to say with your own ears. Bring a brigade with you. If you can't travel, then provide a scholarship for someone who can. How can you help in solidarity? Spread the word about what's happening in Nicaragua and work to change US policy towards the country. The Nicaraguan people are speaking. Will you listen? Thank you. I'll put my email and website in the chat. And if you haven't yet done so, if you'd like to be on our newsletter list, which comes out just 4 times a year, you can put your email and your name in the chat. And let's see, I'll stop the share there. And I'm happy to answer questions. If people have questions or comments.
Okay, if anybody has a question or a comment or something to say, raise your hand and I'll try to recognize you and unmute yourself and ask your question. I'm not seeing anybody with their hands raised. If you have a question, just unmute yourself and then, oh, Grania, go ahead. Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself, Grania.
Okay, thank you, Becca. That was really interesting. But I guess well, I have 2 questions. One is, what percentage of the population of Nicaragua is Afro-descended?
You know, that's a very good question. And I don't know the answer to that right off the top of my head. I'd have to look that up.
I actually didn't realize that that there were a substantial number of Afro-descended folks in Nicaragua. So that was a surprise to me. And the second question is just, I'm reading these statistics that you showed, and I just can't believe I'm shocked at the improvements and the reaction of the US. I mean, you want to say, what is your problem? And I don't know. I guess I'm just expressing my shock. I don't think that's a real question, but
I think that that's one of the reasons that I keep encouraging people to come down here and see it with your own eyes, just because it is one of those things that is very difficult to imagine. You know, it's very difficult to envision the changes for people who've come before, 20 years ago or 15 years ago, or even 10 years ago. They see the difference visibly. But even for people who haven't been before, you get a real sense of what's happening is very different. It's very positive. And I think there's a lot of general disbelief. My father-in-law expressed that same sentiment to me. He said it was just unbelievable. And he said, I think it's hard for us to believe that a government would want the best for its people, because I haven't experienced that myself. So yeah, it's just numbers. But when you see it with your own eyes, it's really pretty profound effect, particularly coming from where they have, and the profound effect that any one of those statistics can have on the family of someone who's vulnerable.
Yes, Wesley.
Becca, thank you very much for the presentation. My question is, especially in a small region like Central America, and given the problems of different kinds that countries up north are facing, like Honduras and El Salvador, I wonder if there's been immigration from those countries to Nicaragua, or if those coming from further south in caravans, etc., which have at some point to go through Nicaragua, are just stopping and realizing that that might be an option for them instead of keep moving north.
Yeah, we haven't seen that in huge numbers. Following the coup in Honduras in 2009, we did see Hondurans coming to Nicaragua, seeking asylum in Nicaragua. And there has always been some level of asylum seeking in Nicaragua in recent years, Haitians, as well as people from Africa. looking to stay here. More recently, we have experienced Cubans coming through Nicaragua on their way north and staying in Nicaragua, not in huge numbers, but that has happened. Many of the Nicaraguans I speak to about this migration that's happening, people say, why doesn't everyone just stay here? They would be better off selling water on the street than they would be, trying to move on and facing what they will face elsewhere. So I think it's certainly the Nicaraguans would share your sentiment. Why doesn't everyone just stay here? It's not, the asylum process here is not any simpler than it is anywhere else. So, as a short answer, but there is some of that. There is certainly some of that.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? If you raise your hand or go to reactions at the bottom of your screen, and there's a hand raise that you can put up on the screen. Okay, I see Jill and Rich Golub. Go ahead and mute yourselves. There you go.
Thank you. And thanks for the great presentation, Becca. I've had the great fortune of being on 2 delegations facilitated by you to Nicaragua in the past 2 years. But I wonder if I think one of the things that Jubilee House Community has, that a lot of people that were in Nicaragua in the 80s then just left. And if you hear the Nicaraguans, it sounds like they feel they were abandoned. And I know Arnie stayed with Nicaragua, stayed faithful to Nicaragua all these years, but what is it that people missed who just, were in Nicaragua in the 80s and maybe didn't pay attention until they saw, or they get some news from the MRS that has a big platform here in the US, or just saw the violence in 2018 and accepted the mainstream media account of that. What could you tell us a little bit about the FSLN being involved with the people, or the FSLN movement in the 90s when things were really hard, from what I gather? Thanks.
Yeah, in the 90s and the 2000s. So there was 16 years in there where there was neoliberal governments were in power. And I think for people who saw Nicaragua in the 1980s and then maybe didn't have much contact with Nicaragua after that, they missed being in solidarity with the Nicaraguan people during one of the toughest times. I think it was very quiet suffering that was happening. In the 1980s, the war was a much more visible type of suffering for people here. And in the 90s and the 2000s, poverty was dire. It became really awful. I was here, I came after Hurricane Mitch, so I was able to see people in the conditions they were living in after Hurricane Mitch, and having just been to the coast where the hurricanes hit just a year ago, I can tell you they're in better conditions there now than the people were 5 years after Hurricane Mitch. There is just no comparison. And I think that being, from my perspective, having been able to see people begging outside hospitals, having been here to see people unable to get very basic services, very basic care, the changes are all that more meaningful. A lot of the changes that are happening in the country, the programs are specifically to benefit the poorest people. So if you're someone who is wealthy or a foreigner who travels in wealthy circles, maybe you don't see the change in the same way. But for people who were, have been struggling to feed their families, any of these changes is a huge, huge jump for them. During the years when they were not in power, the FSLN continued governing from below. So there was a lot of activities that were happening. For example, during those years, the higher education is supposed to, by the Constitution says higher education is supposed to receive 6% of the annual budget. During the neoliberal years, that didn't happen. And so universities were underfunded. And the Sandinista youth and the FSLN continued organizing, fighting for that 6%, which is now the universities are receiving their 6. And we see the difference because there's now 19% of Nicaraguans have a university degree instead of 9%. So you can see immediately a change in that. So there was a lot of continued activity. There was, it was not, they were not dormant during that time, but it was a very different time. And there was a lot of suffering here in those neoliberal years, a lot of suffering.
Anyone else? Yes, Hal Bauer, go ahead.
Thank you. Again, excuse me for my colossal ignorance of Nicaragua and Daniel Ortega, but according to what I've read on the Wikipedia article on Daniel Ortega, he changed to support the Catholic Church and the adoption of strong anti-abortion policies in the 2000s, as well as a strong religious rhetoric. So how does that jive with the what you describe as the women's role in the new Nicaragua?
Yes.
Reproductive choice and health.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm happy to answer that one. Jill and I actually recently had a very interesting discussion about this with healthcare workers here in Nicaragua. First of all, be careful believing what you read on Wikipedia or pretty much anywhere what you read about Nicaragua these days. It's difficult to sort through what's being said. But yes, it is true that abortion is not legal in Nicaragua. That law was passed actually before the FSLN came back into power this last time, in 2006. And it does also say that all types of abortion are illegal, is what the law says. What happens in practice here in Nicaragua is that, as there are in hospitals, there's a committee that makes decisions. And the directive from the Ministry of Health is that no one is to save human lives. So what happens in practice is that if someone's life is in danger, abortions are in fact performed. And those are decisions that are made by the committee in the hospital, and those abortions are performed. We do not receive news from any sectors about women dying for lack of a need of an abortion. And we have to remember that Nicaragua is a religious country. There is actually, fewer Catholics than there used to be, but most people are either Catholic or evangelical Christian of some kind of Pentecostal version, and none of those religions are in favor of abortion. So in the public opinion would, in general, if you in surveys and so forth, would be anti-abortion. But in practice, those things do happen. Abortions do happen, and decisions are made to save lives. And there is, I think, there's not a huge demand to change the law. And I think that the government would be looking at reading the room of when that might come about, that there would be public support for a change of the law. But until then, I think the plan would be to continue on making sure that people don't die, that women don't die for need of an abortion. So, Jill, I'll just ask real quick, did I miss anything in that answer that you would like to add? Because Jill was also in on the recent conversation.
Sure, thanks. Well, one thing that I learned early on from, I began paying more attention to Nicaragua after a period of just thinking things were fine, but I've been paying more attention since 2018. And the first thing that I heard was that myth about Daniel Ortega putting in this abortion law is a great piece of propaganda work. First, that law was polling at over 80%. I'm not sure, it might have even been 88% popular. This very religious population, as Becca is saying, wanted this law. And in fact, they thought and the FSLN did not have a majority in the legislature. And it was thought by, and I think this is in some of the WikiLeaks cable files, they thought the MRS, which was the disaffected Sandinistas, traitors, as other people would call them, who were working with the State Department, thought that the FSLN would vote against this law and that would seal the fate that they wouldn't win the election at the end of 2006. But no one voted against it. And some FSLN people in the legislature abstained. But even if every single FSLN representative had voted against that law, it would have passed. Nobody in any of the other parties, and the MRS had a few seats then, they didn't vote against this law. And so this is something that was, as Becca said, popular with the population. And then we had a very interesting conversation about this, as Becca was alluding to, at the Nueva Vida clinic with two of the healthcare workers. And they were talking about a need to protect the population from this law, and how sometimes if a woman's pregnancy put her life in danger and they medically felt that an abortion was necessary, if the family was against this, they have an ethics team that would meet and handle the situation and work with the family. These are the kinds of things that happen, behind closed doors that affect real people's lives. And then on the other hand, as Becca was alluding to, and I have heard this repeatedly, and I have heard this from Salvadoran women who I know in the Washington area. El Salvador has the same, almost the verbatim same, very draconian, complete ban on abortion that Nicaragua has. In El Salvador, there are cases of women being held virtually prisoner, being chained to beds so that they don't get an abortion. In Nicaragua, that is not happening. And I think, I don't think that it's a big priority for the FSLN, because I don't think it's coming up for the grassroots. However, there is a feminist group of feminist peasants that I see Leslie and Scott are on this call, who we stayed with in January of 2020, and they very much want to have abortion legalized, and they have posters about it and they campaign about it, and hopefully little by little they're making headway. But as Becca said, it's a very Christian country, and the general sentiment is not that that is a priority. Thanks.
I will just add to that, that family planning and birth control is not, there is not taboo. Although it is a very Christian country, it's not taboo. So there is free family planning available through the public system. They do IUDs as well as tubal ligations and also pills and injections and so forth. And they encourage women before they leave the hospital after they had their baby to have a plan in place for what their family planning will be. So that's very much encouraged, very accessible, and all through the public system is all free. So that's kind of in juxtaposition to the anti-abortion law. It seems strange, but there's really not a taboo against it. And certainly the Ministry of Health promotes family planning.
Okay, I saw Kathy Goforth had her hand up, followed by Richard Rosen.
My question was about birth control, and hopefully they start at an early age, in the schools and, elementary or even high school, that they need to get knowledge early. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I agree 100% with you, Kathy. And working with at-risk teenage girls, I agree 110%. My girls have been in public school the whole way through. They're now going into 10th and 11th grades. And they began in preschool. Part of the curriculum is learning the correct anatomical names for the parts of the body. I had a friend who was also a foreigner who called me up when his daughter was going through this and said, "What's going on here? Why are they having drawings of genitals with my daughter in preschool? Why is she learning that? This is terrible." And I said, well, they're teaching them that so that the children have vocabulary. And if anyone is sexually abused, they have the vocabulary to talk about it with someone. And they had a whole campaign to teach the parents to use correct terminology with the children instead of slang words. So this was something that started early on in the 5th grade. My girls had to do reports on the pros and cons of every type of available contraception. So that they learned all about it and what were the pros and cons of each one. So yes, this is something that is very accessible. They learn about it early on. And my opinion, of course, is that you can't say it enough.
Okay, Richard Rosen, you had your hand up. Oh, Gail Matt, you've got us on screen share, Gail.
Yeah. You answered my question about birth control. It's excellent. So let me use this opportunity to change the subject and ask you about rainforest preservation.
Richard, hold on 1 minute. Gail, you've got us on screen sharing. Can you shut off your screen, please? Gail Matt?
Okay, could you please tell me what to do? I have no idea why it's on this.
I'm not sure. Who, Becca or somebody that uses screen
Sure.
sharing more than
Yeah, if you just turn your
Sure, at the
video
very
off, stop
top.
video.
At the very top, click stop screen share. Very top in the center on your computer.
Oh, thank
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
Very good.
Sorry, Richard, could you start your question again, please?
Yes, I saw on YouTube, but I assume there's a lot of disinformation about rainforest preservation and the government working in the southern area with farmers who are, can you tell us something about their planned activities to preserve trees while still cultivating the land?
Right. Yeah. So Nicaragua is, boy, there's a lot of different projects that are happening in terms of preservation and in terms of fighting climate change. The Nicaragua has a lot of, let's see now, there I actually have a number here. If you'll bear with me 1 second, I think I can find the actual number of acres of land, or perhaps hectares. 1 second. So since 2007, Nicaragua has created a national system of protected areas, which now represents 25.5% of the national territory.
Wow.
That's an area of 3.3 million hectares made up of 72 protected areas. Additionally, they have reforested 32,000 hectares in that same time period. Nicaragua has a lot of initiatives around this. It's of course tied in with the renewable energy and climate justice actions as well. Nicaragua, you may know, has been, in fact, has been leading in climate issues for a while. Nicaragua didn't sign on originally to the Paris Agreement because it felt that it wasn't stringent enough. And that's the kind of focus that Nicaragua has had, is trying to push other countries, in fact, to be more stringent. So the policy is certainly for protection. There's new laws that have come in making it very easy to become a private reserve as well, which means that you have access, importantly, access to a lot of programs that that support reforestation and discourage deforestation. So this is at a farmer level. In fact, my family, my we're looking into turning our land into a private reserve because it's free. They come and help you fill out the paperwork, and then you can have access to programs such as, I don't know if you know, but in Nicaragua, iguanas are a food source. It's a popular food source. And so they're hunted in areas with slingshots, and then they're sold and people make soup out of iguanas. So the government has started a program to help people make money while also preserving the iguanas. So they give you baby iguanas and teach you how to raise iguanas. And then the agreement is that a certain percentage of those are released into the wild, and the rest of them you sell for your, money. So you're basically helping to restock the forests with iguanas, and also bring some money in without taking the iguanas out of the natural environment. So there's all kinds of these programs that try to help people to make money and feed their families without having to cut the trees down for firewood, which is, firewood sales in Managua, at least a number, probably about 5 years ago when I looked it up, were about $12 million a year. And that's just tiny little people selling one tree at a time. But you can deforest a lot, one tree at a time. So there's a lot of those different initiatives on a small scale. And then on the larger scale, there's these bigger reserves, as I mentioned, which make up, a quarter of the national territory. In addition to that, I would mention that Nicaragua's 31% of Nicaragua's national territory has been deeded to indigenous communities in non-transferable land titles, which have benefited 200,000 people in 314 communities. So I don't know if you can imagine the scale of that, but if we were to do something, it's kind of inconceivable that the United States would start deeding over land to indigenous communities, I think. And Nicaragua has been doing that in order for those communities to protect themselves. So those areas that are, belong to the indigenous people, they can't be sold. And that means that then the indigenous communities are in charge of looking after their own land that way. That's not to say there's no land issues in Nicaragua, because there certainly are. But in those areas that are the autonomous regions, and in the areas that belong to the indigenous communities are the ones who lead how to deal with people who are cutting down forest, or who are invading lands, or who are doing something they're not in agreement with. And they have culturally very different ways of dealing with that. But importantly, they're allowed to lead that themselves, and with the support from the Nicaraguan police and often the Nicaraguan army as well. In fact, because Nicaragua is not at war and we have an army, we do actually have a resource there that can be deployed to support the environment. So there is actually a brigade of the Nicaraguan army that's their job is to stop deforestation and patrol the forests. There's another brigade whose job it is to patrol the beaches during the times when the turtles are laying their eggs and hatching, to ensure that there's not people stealing turtle eggs. So those are amazing to think about what you can do with a resource like an army when you're not running a war or several wars.
Okay, other questions? Gail, Matt, unmute yourself. Go
Okay,
ahead, Gail.
yes. I'd like to know if there are any journalists you know of who are coming down to really find out what's going on in Nicaragua. It seems so that almost 100%.
Yeah, we didn't get that whole thing. Your computer's froze. Can you ask us again? Try it again.
It sounds like Gail was asking about whether there's journalists coming down to kind of get the real story. And I can say that not mainstream journalists, unfortunately. There's a lot of folks involved in alternative media who've come to Nicaragua and are trying to get the story out more. But mainstream media is not You know, all the articles, unfortunately, there's some pretty misinformed, misinformation or disinformation there on even places like NPR, even places like PBS. And those folks don't have anyone in Nicaragua. Their correspondents are in Mexico or elsewhere outside the country. And the sources that they use from within Nicaragua are, unfortunately, a lot of them are that independent media that the United States has funded, that publish in English as well. And so that's one of the reasons that they have some reach. And they're not coming to Nicaragua to see with their own eyes what's happening here. So very little of that is getting out.
Kathleen Kern is saying that the reporters from NPR were denied a visa to Nicaragua. Can you address that?
I didn't hear anything about that. I don't know if anyone else heard something about it. I did not hear that anyone was denied a visa. If you're as a U.S. citizen, you get a tourist visa when you come into the country. It's unusual that people would be denied a visa.
I know I watched a presentation on Nicaragua not too long ago on NPR, and I was quite astonished that there was not one segment or even a sentence from the representing the Sandinista side of the issue. So I'm not sure what their motive is down there. So that may be something that you'd have to look into.
Yeah.
It may be disinformation.
I will say that sometimes in articles they say they tried to contact someone within the government to get a quote. The Nicaraguan government is very skittish about giving quotes to mainstream media where they see they know what type of articles are coming out of what type of outlets, and they don't see a lot of point in giving a quote to an outlet that's just going to trash Nicaragua. So they kind of don't waste their time with that sometimes. So that's part of that reason is, that's why they don't, if it says, we tried to contact someone, maybe they did, and people just said, that's not an outlet that's going to put us in a good light.
Scott has his hand up.
Scott, you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you. Oh boy, there's so many things, so many thoughts that I have that I could comment on. And let me say, Becca, what a wonderful presentation you gave. Thank you. And thank you for doing so much to support the trip that Jill and Leslie and I went on 2 years ago to the day, right? 2 years ago to the day. Thank you. In my childhood, I was Catholic, and now I'm Buddhist, and I have a friend. So I live in Maryland. I have a friend who's Jewish and lives in Philadelphia, and she also practices Buddhism. She knows that I went to Nicaragua recently, and she gave me a gift of Nicaraguan coffee, and she urged me, I really do have to get in touch with the people at Jubilee House because it's a wonderful group of people. They're doing the right thing, and she forwarded me some of your material, and I forwarded her back some of your material. So the reputation of Jubilee House spreads far beyond the Catholic community or the Maryland community, and even beyond the Philadelphia community. You're doing a lot of good work. We love you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
And where can I get your coffee in Maryland?
I'll put the link in the chat right now. In fact, we're shipping in the States.
Great. And I have a couple more things to say. I'm studying Spanish in college and was asked to give a presentation on Nicaragua. So part of what I studied in response to one of the questions is that the northern indigenous nation around Bilwi is Afro-Caribbean, but the southern indigenous nation is not generally Afro. That's one thing. And another thing is there's an article in today's Washington Post that people of color are leaving senior positions at NPR because NPR does not represent alternative perspectives, which maybe everyone on this call is not surprised about that. NPR is not centrist, much less left of center. It's right of center. And instead of discussing things like we're discussing today, they would not present, would they, the Sandinista perspective, but take every opportunity to present the right-wing perspective in the United States. So in any event, I would have more comments, but thank you again so much.
Thank
Scott.
you so much, Scott. I will just point out right now that just speaking of, people of color and representation, if you look at photographs of the Nicaraguan cabinet ministers, you'll find not only are 59% of them women, but they are all also people of color and people from varied backgrounds. We always feel very proud when they're featured.
Okay, Richard, I see you have your hand up. If you
Yes.
want to unmute yourself, and then I've got a chat from Kathleen Kern I got to ask about too. So go ahead, Richard.
I want to ask about the role of private enterprise. If I were to open a business in Nicaragua, would there be incentives in place to make it a workers-owned cooperative?
So there seems like there's two questions there. Are you speaking as a foreign investment? Or are you speaking as Nicaraguan worker-owned co-ops?
Well, let's assume I would find a partner in
Okay.
Nicaragua to overcome
Okay.
the foreign investor issue.
Okay. So yeah, you can be a foreign investor in Nicaragua. There's a whole series of programs. I'm not up on what the incentives for those are currently, but we do have free trade zones in Nicaragua. We do have a lot of incentives for foreign investment. I know that in 2010, Nicaragua was like the #1 place for doing business, according to the World Bank, which has their kind of standards. In terms of worker-owned cooperatives, in the 1980s, Nicaragua had kind of a boom with worker-owned cooperatives, of course. And as soon as the Sandinistas left power in 1990, the funding for those cooperatives stopped. So cooperatives were no longer able to access financing of any kind. And what happened to all of those cooperatives was that they all shut down, because without access to working capital, they had to then, to get money to operate, they had to sell their tractor. And when you've sold your tractor, then you don't have your tractor to work anymore. And it was a vicious cycle where basically all the cooperatives, there were very few that survived. I was in the business of helping Nicaraguans set up worker-owned businesses during the neoliberal years, and I can tell you just how difficult it was to do anything as a cooperative. Was very, very difficult. Now that's changed a lot, and I know less about it, because now they don't allow for foreigners to just wander in and do things on behalf of Nicaraguans. You need to be a member of the cooperative to do stuff, which I think is exactly the right direction to go. But I'm a little less hands-on with that side of things now because of that. But there is access, of course. There's a whole ministry here in Nicaragua that the ministry that governs the cooperatives is called the Ministry for the Family and Popular Economy, something along those lines. And it focuses on small micro businesses and on cooperatives as well. Cooperatives are very much a part of that. And in recent years, there's been a lot of businesses set up, a lot more cooperatives set up. I think there's been somewhere around 300 cooperatives, 300 women's cooperatives set up in the past 15 years, let alone other cooperatives that are either mixed or have men in them. So those are being promoted as a way to work by the Nicaraguan government. They have a program that they have a zero hunger program, which provides people with animals that they can, chickens and pigs and so forth. And then they have a program called Zero Usury, which provides loans for women. And a lot of those groups that have successfully taken out loans and paid them back from the zero usury programs, they have then formed women's cooperatives. So it's kind of a stepping stone for co-ops, and there seems to be a lot of benefits with that. There's a lot of training. I think there's a fair amount of, I don't want to say hand holding, but the people at the ministry tend to be very hands-on in supporting people in making it happen. So you don't have to be an expert in anything to get your co-op up and running and keep it running. That having been said, I think that, from my perspective, having dealt with this, micro businesses and small businesses have a certain amount of access to capital, like zero usury. The government has another program to do that. And then there is some access to microfinancing through microfinancing institutions that charge much higher interest rates, but it is available. When you get to become a cooperative and you've got a minimum of 10 people or more working, you tend to need more working capital because you're doing more. And then those $5,000 loans or $2,000 loans, or in some cases, $500 loans don't get you very far. So in order to access those kind of medium-sized amounts of money that aren't the millions of dollars, but are in the tens of thousands of dollars or more, is still pretty difficult in Nicaragua. That's still difficult. And the banks are not, banks don't loan at good interest rates and don't loan to small farmers or small businesses very well. So there's kind of a I would say a hole there that needs to be filled. And that's some of the work that our organization does. But of course, we would need like millions and millions of dollars to do that. But so it is possible to run a cooperative, but as with anything, getting your financing is difficult. And some co-ops get around that by having buyers that will, will pay a percentage up front, or that will give them loans or set up a revolving loan fund for them, that sort of thing. But that is still I would say a stumbling block to setting up a more medium or larger size business for worker-owned businesses.
Well,
Okay, Becca, we have two more questions here. I didn't see this whole first question when I first read the chat. Can you talk about the arrest of Ortega's political opponents? For example, Comandante Dora Maria Diaz, General Hugo Torres, and Ana Mana Vigil.
Yeah. So those are some of the people who have been arrested. This is Nicaragua has some new laws on the books that are actually the same as laws that exist in the United States, but Nicaragua did not have before, that deal particularly with treason and with money laundering. There is a group of people who I mentioned that the coup attempt in 2018 was funded by the United States, and was led by the US, and money came to Nicaragua to fund these organizations that were leading the coup. That money was brought into the country for a specific purpose, but then was in some cases diverted to coup activities. In other cases, was actually just diverted to personal bank accounts. So there's a lot of the people who've been arrested. There's a group that have been accused of various things. Some people have been accused of money laundering. I think the most prominent person in that category would be Cristiana Chamorro, who is the daughter of the former president, Violeta Chamorro. And her organization received millions of dollars from various branches of USAID, the National Endowment for Democracy, the International Republican Institute, and so forth. And they funneled those to other organizations. Then the Nicaraguan government set up a new law where all organizations that receive funds from foreign countries have to register with the government, say where that money is coming from and what it's going to. This organization, Cristiana Chamorro's organization, instead of registering, claimed that the government had made it too difficult for them to continue working, and so they were having to shut down. They tried to close down. Of course, you have to ask permissions to shut down, and they didn't go through the whole process of formally closing their organization either. And at least $7 million of the organization's money wound up in Cristiana Chamorro's private bank account, and so she's being questioned. She is, I believe, she's under house arrest in her particular case. So there's people that have done things like that. Then there's also people who have been advocating for sanctions against Nicaragua. So there was a set of sanctions against Nicaragua that was passed in 2018 called the NICA Act. And there's a whole group of people that went up to the United States and lobbied for that openly, met with Marco Rubio, met with, these were groups of coup leaders, met with Ted Cruz, and to get these things passed. And then again with the Renacer Act, which was just passed right before the elections in Nicaragua in November, there were people lobbying for that. The Nicaraguan law now says, as of a law that was passed last year, that Nicaraguan citizens cannot lobby another country for sanctions on their own country, that is treason. The US has that same law as well. And there's some people who've been arrested because they, in fact, came to, not only we're talking about, but went to the United States, met with lawmakers, and were lobbying for sanctions against their own country. So they are also, some of them are arrested. Each case is different. There are people who are in protective custody, in jail awaiting trial. The Ministry of the Interior, the Public Prosecutor's Office, sets out every week reports on each of those cases, who's been presented before a judge, what charges are against them, when they're going to trial, what evidence has been presented, if that evidence has been allowed or not, and so forth. So these cases are all moving forwards now, but there is a group of people who've been arrested for these reasons. And I think that if you compare to the situation, if you compare this sort of thing to what's happening in the United States, no one would be surprised that the United States would arrest someone who had gone to Russia and asked for Russia to impose sanctions, or asked for China to impose sanctions on the United States. No one would be surprised if an organization received funding from Russia and then tried to influence an election in the United States, for example, or tried to, in fact, overthrow the government. I think that we can see similarities with, in fact, tomorrow is the anniversary of the Capitol riots. Imagine if some of those Capitol rioters, they're all being arrested. The FBI is investigating all of them. Is anyone surprised? This is what governments do to protect their themselves. And so this is what's happening here. Specifically, in the case of Dora Maria Tejas, who I know is someone who's been quite prominent in, a lot of people in the US know of her. And she was directly involved in the attempted overthrow of the government in 2018. She was directly organizing the roadblocks that where people were tortured and murdered. And she was paying the people who were running the roadblocks. These are the accusations against her, among other things. So she's in jail awaiting trial. And I think the QAnon shaman, is also awaiting trial, and he was, there in the Capitol, trying to question the elections in the U.S. and overthrow the government there. So I think it's just it's the government trying to, protect its security.
I always come back to the number of people that our government's arrested for peaceful protests at the School of the Americas against the brutal murders of people in their own country in Central and South America, and how many of those people have spent time in federal penitentiaries for a lot less level of violation than what you're talking about. We got time for one last, that was just an editorial comment, so sorry. One last question is, are there people within the US government that Nicaragua would consider an ally?
Within the US government.
Yeah, is there anybody in the US government that's actually supportive of the Nicaraguan government?
There's few lawmakers who didn't vote for the Renacer Act, but that doesn't mean that they're supportive of the Nicaraguan government. I don't know that I don't know. Maybe Arnie and Jill have other thoughts on that. At this
I would
point,
say it's very sparse. If there's any.
very sparse.
I
Yeah.
think there are 15 members of the House voted against the Renacer Act, and how many people are in the House? There's a bunch of them. So to answer the question, I would think there's very few.
Yeah, I think there is some people who are paying attention to what's happening, and some people who might not be 100% behind the U.S. government's take on things. But at this point, Nicaragua doesn't have a fighter in its corner in the U.S. government.
Okay, well, I think we're going to call it a wrap, Becca. With that, you're been most knowledgeable and very informative, and we really appreciate it. And Arnie, we appreciate you setting this up with Becca and ourselves. That stick you might see against my back wall over there, that's from my trip to Nicaragua in 1994 to Los Rastrojos, a small community. But my experience has been the Nicaraguan people are beautiful people, and they deserve to have their own voice and choice in how things are run in their own country without us getting involved that much. So anyways, again, an editorial comment. I have that habit. You should see me after I've had a couple more beers, but we won't get there. But anyways, thank you. It was very good, very enjoyable evening spending it with you, and we wish you well, and keep on keeping on.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
all
Becca.
so much.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it.
Be well, you and your family.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Oh,
Ben.
Thank
and
you.
just to let everybody know, this program was recorded. It'll be posted up on our website within a couple days. So if you want to go back and hear it again, or let your friends know about it, you can look for it on our website at www.racla.org. Okay.
Thank you, Tom. And
Thank you.
maybe you want to edit out the part where I was trying to find a way to screen share.
We could probably do that. We have a wonderful webmaster, so. But I don't know. I thought it was part of the show. It was pretty good.
For the show.
Thank you.
So
Thank you very
Becca.
much.
Good night.
It's
Thanks,
typical,
Becca.
Thank you.
it's
Good
typical,
night.
Becca. It's typical, Nika. Something's gonna go wrong and you go ahead and go.
That's right, Doug. The brakes go out and you keep on driving.
Okay, I'm going to end the meeting for all.
Okay.
Have a good night.
Thanks, Tom. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Becca.